Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. And naturally, I'm having some small technical difficulty. There we go. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to come and talk to such an esteemed group, especially brought together by a firm like Denton's that's at the forefront of AI in legal. But I wanted to take a moment and really to think about the future, because the future can be incredibly hard to picture. We are being confronted continuously by these new technologies. We are confronted by new user interfaces and new capabilities that feel like magic. And it can be very difficult for people who are not immersed in the field to really understand what's going to happen next. And so I thought that's what I would focus most of my time on today. Now, just to focus our minds on the problem and opportunity that we have before us, I did a little bit of quick research and found that the Federal Bar Association in the US conducted an extensive survey of lawyers practicing there to understand what is their use of AI. And in 2023, they found that personal use was 27% and law firm use was 24%, personal use was 31%, and law firm use was 21%. Now, this is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One, I think it may represent a dramatic underperformance in terms of the realization of the opportunity. But the other thing that I would like you to reflect on, and for those of you who are leaders in different organizations, is the spread between personal and law firm use. And obviously, I'm not calling out anyone in particular, but it is happening at every organization today that people are doing their work and they are copying and pasting documents into ChatGPT and then asking them questions about them. If in your organization, the version of ChatGPT that is being used to do that is the free version, if you're not providing an enterprise installation of ChatGPT, what happens to those documents? They get trained into the model. So if you're getting ready to give a talk about something, say the strategic direction of your company over the next 5 years, and you ask it, hey, can you help me to rephrase this? It'll help you to rephrase it, and I hope it'll make the talk more compelling, but you now have also trained the model with those details, okay? So let's take a look at the things that people are using AI to do. So, improving the persuasiveness of briefing language, cool. Summarizing online meetings. I know I weird people out at meetings all the time because I've got one of those note takers that shows up. Drafting social media posts, business management, translation, summarizing medical records. Summarizing medical records into the model, drafting blog posts, marketing and branding, et cetera, et cetera. So those of you who are leaders in your organizations, for the chief legal officers here, I imagine the alarm bells have already been going off for you, trying to understand what is the reliability of this stuff, what is your liability of the output of these models and your choices to adopt what they give you. If you are working in privacy or as a data officer, you think, oh my gosh, what are the implications for the privacy of our data and what is the security that is going to be around this? If you're a leader in human resources, you see the change that is coming and think, how can we possibly manage this change within our organization? And it may feel to you a little bit like this is the rest of your company. Now, I will say my personal favorite use for generative AI is to generate figures for talks because you can get an image of someone playing with fire. But tell me honestly and reflect for just a moment, do you ever feel like that's you? Because people are grabbing these tools, they're using them. Apple and the iPhone and smartphones broke the barriers to the use of personal technologies in a business context, and now what we're seeing over and over and over again is that people feel free to use those tools, okay? So what I thought that I would do is talk to you a little bit about the tools that exist today and where that exists on the timeline of what's to come, and then give you a bit of a preview of what you're going to be seeing over the next few years in terms of what will happen with AI, okay? So the way that I can say with some confidence that I can predict what for some people is the future is that it actually is the present for many of us. So William Gibson is a great science fiction author, and he famously said, the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. So those of us working in university labs, and I think many of you know that my colleague in my department recently won the Nobel Prize for his contributions to developing AI. Just as a quick aside, if ever you need a humbling moment in your life, picture what happened to me, which was my mom calling me and saying, hey, Daniel, I heard the guy down the hall from you just won the Nobel Prize. So what are you up to this week? Anyway, so Jeff and his work, I think, really centered it. But for those of us who've been working in the field, that work started in the 1980s. Right? So we've been continuously building this and building upon it for many, many years. And so I'm going to show you some of the outputs of things that will be in the future. So there are 3 chapters I want to talk about. First, what I call the Charlie Chaplin problem. Then I'll talk about what is authentic AI. And then finally, why I think that Canada is the exciting place to be doing this work. So let's start with Charlie Chaplin. Continuing with my citations to other University of Toronto professors who are more accomplished than I, here's Marshall McLuhan. So Marshall McLuhan said, the content of any new medium is the old medium. And now he said this decades and decades and decades ago, so why am I talking to you about this in a talk about AI? Well, I'm going to tell you a story about how, when new technologies come along, what we use those technologies for actually follows a very predictable pattern. And I'm going to use that to extrapolate forward to help you understand what's going to happen next. So let's talk about film for a moment. If I showed you a film from the very, very early days, the late 1800s, the early 1900s, you would recognize it almost immediately. And not just because of the frame rate and it's grainy and it's jittery and all those things. You'd recognize it because it looks like this. The camera is pointing straight on. You see all the actors head to toe. And all of the action takes place in a single camera. Why does it look like this? Like, first of all, some recognition here. You've seen movies that look like this, right? It doesn't look like a movie that you would now call a movie. It's not that they couldn't pick up the camera and move it. It's not that no one had invented the scissors, so they couldn't take 2 different things and splice them together. It's because they didn't know to do any of those things yet, because there was just this new technology that came along, and they thought, well, what can we use it to do? So they did what everyone always does with the new technology. They look to their present. What is their present? Stage plays. They said, OK, we'll put on stage plays in front of the camera, we'll film them, and then we'll put them into theaters. We'll call them movie theaters. And it actually takes decades of innovators using this technology to start to do what now to us is just the language of film, but doing things like changing the zoom level, like changing the camera angle. And eventually you get, in the mid-1940s, Citizen Kane. This is decades and decades and decades after Edison and co. make the film camera accessible. All right, let's talk about the timeline for just a second. There's the old medium. Then we get the old content on a new medium. Then, somewhere between, call it 10 and 30 years later, eventually you get what we call the authentic content. OK, you were promised to talk on AI. Why am I talking about old movies? This applies to technology, too. You may be a doubter. You may be saying, well, computers aren't media. Why are you telling me about this? Does anyone know what a computer actually is? Like, before they were boxes, before they were electronics, what is the computer named after? Does anyone know what it was before? People. Thank you, Tom. There's a movie about it. These are the computers. Groups of people in an office building, just like a typing pool, but you would send your math down to them. They would do your math and send it back up to you, and these were computers. And so when we started to develop this digital technology that could do math quickly, people who were developing it reached for, what are we going to use this technology for? And they, often in the very same rooms as the ones you saw in that Hidden Figures, that was the movie about NASA, about their computers, in exactly the same rooms where they had computers before, they put the digital computers. So there's a digital computer, same room. And just as a quick aside, is it the case that all of those people who were computers before are no longer working as computers as the technology takes over? Absolutely yes. Jobs get lost. Is it true that those people can't find other jobs that are now more productive and now enable them to do more productive and exciting things? That's also the case. Okay, so when people talk about job losses to AI, it's, I would argue, just a fundamental lack of imagination. Eventually, 30 years after that, we get what you and I would call a computer, a desktop computer. Okay? Named because windows on a screen overlap like pieces of paper on a desk. Desktop computer. So, what's the timeline? We've got the old medium. We've got the new medium with old content. 10 to 30 years later, we get the new. What about cell phones? Chris, this is going to be our moment in a second. Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone in 2007. He talked about its revolutionary user interface. This was Apple's second phone, although very few people remember the first phone. But the iPhone gets introduced. And let's see what Steve Jobs had to say when he introduced the iPhone. What did he say it was?
A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary... A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device.
So, even Steve Jobs, when he was talking about the iPhone, what was it? It was the old stuff. Okay, so let's put it back on the timeline. So we have, in Steve's words, an iPod, a phone, and an internet communications device. I'll stick a computer in there for that. You take those 3 devices, you combine them, new medium, old content, an iPod, a phone, an internet communications device. 10 to 30 years later, what happens? So how are the iPhones of today different from the iPhones then? They're different in terms of their sensing. They have cameras now, they have GPS now, which are sort of 2 of the key sensors. The other thing that's different is, if we looked at a list of the top 10 applications on the iPhone today, only one of them existed when the iPhone came out. That's our most current data. What's the one that existed? I worked there briefly, my eye jumps to it. Facebook was there. It didn't exist as an app, it was a website, but everything else comes later. And why? Because it takes people a while to realize that the iPhone is not just an internet communications device in your pocket, it actually is something fundamentally different. It's a camera with a GPS and an internet connection that you carry around with you. Okay? It is for fundamentally different applications than the technologies that came before. So, let's review. Old medium, new medium, old content. 10 to 30 years later, you get the authentic. And this is what I call the Charlie Chaplin problem. People see the new technologies, they apply the old medium, and just like you might recognize a Charlie Chaplin movie of that era, we get Charlie Chaplin-like applications. But let's now talk about the new content. And the new content we might call authentic AI. Now, there are a whole bunch of applications that are what I would call inauthentic AI. Let's talk sort of briefly about gaining some intuition for what those are, and why things that you might recognize today as AI, I would argue are like the iPod, the phone, the internet communication device. It's just the old stuff in a new medium, okay? Clue number 1. If your AI does stuff worse than before, it's not authentic AI. So what do I mean by that? For a talk, I needed to generate this image. As I said before, my favorite application of generative AI is to generate an image, right, for my talks. All right, what was my prompt? I want an image of a scientist in a lab coat with a Canadian maple leaf throwing a football downfield in a football stadium. For the jocks in the room, is she doing a good job throwing that football? No, it's not a perfect spiral. And you look at that and think, okay, how do I get it to fix it? Well, I have to prompt it again. Move the ball to her fingertips so it looks like she is releasing it. I mean, yeah, but no, right? Okay. Prompt again. Move the ball up into, so I sort of gave up. I said, all right, I'm not going to get her with the right grip on the ball. So I said, okay, move the ball up into the air so it looks like she has thrown it. Again, if you don't happen to play football, you may not know that that is not a good throw. Okay. All right. So then finally, and you know, and every one of these generations takes like 4 or 5 minutes, right? So now I'm like 15 minutes into this. Change the angle of the ball so it's being thrown in through the air. Okay. Why do I look at that and say, it's doing the same stuff you could do before but worse? The first step of generating the image, that's new, that's great. But man, looking at this as someone who's an expert in designing technologies, I look at it and say, for the love of all things holy, why can't I just reach in with my finger, grab the ball, and slide it down? Why? Well, the simple answer for that question is that people who are developing these technologies are bringing the old into the new world, but the old that they're bringing in this case, the old that they're bringing is command line interfaces, right? So some of you here have had that experience of needing to use a computer by sitting at a command prompt and sticking a floppy disk in and typing at it, right? We've gone back to that somehow with AI. We've thrown away decades of experience in better user interfaces. All right, what's another proof point for this? For those in the legal profession, those of you who worry about risk. Professors are using ChatGPT and some students aren't happy. You guys hear about this lawsuit? This is from the New York Times. Halfway through the document, which her business professor had made for a lesson on models of leadership, was an instruction to ChatGPT to expand on all areas, be more detailed and specific. Now, you look at that and think, like, fail on the professor, right? Like, one, is it okay the professor was using ChatGPT? We can talk about that. But why do these instructions appear halfway through? Anyone here who uses ChatGPT knows exactly why this happened, because you can't copy and paste from it properly. The only way you can copy is to copy the entire thread, and then you have to go back and delete the stuff you don't want. I mean, copy and paste has worked since 1983. ChatGPT still can't do it. Okay. All right. So where are we at here? Old medium, new medium, old content, authentic content. So this is the journey of computing. Let's move forward in time. Okay, what happens now? ChatGPT comes along, but when they're reaching back and they're bringing forward the old content, they're not even bringing forward the content from that computer. They're bringing forward this thing. Right? For those of you who have this experience, you recognize it, right? This is how you used to command a computer with a keyboard. Okay? So if you're looking to find out if something is authentic, the first test you should apply to a product that is being presented to you is, does it build on the best of what has come before? Okay. All right. That's easy. This is table stakes. Let's get to clue number 2, replacing people. This is another example of the same sort of lack of imagination that gives us old content, new medium. In this case, the old content that is being applied is the person, right? So you think, okay, just like the people with the film camera, they want to make new content, right? Say, okay, I've got this new thing, it's got capabilities, it's intelligent, and it can do things that kind of sort of look like intelligence. What can I use it to do? Oh, I can fire that person. I can get rid of that job. And this is the first thing that comes to mind, I argue, simply because it's a lack of imagination, but it's a necessary first step. So what do I mean by this? And what should it look like? So let's say, here's our teacher teaching a pupil, okay? Right now, there is something like, and it changes every day, but there's something like 25 different apps that you can use online that sit on top of ChatGPT and say, well, now you can have a robot teaching your kid, right? Not a physical robot, but like a digital robot. Okay, that's the lack of imagination. That's the inauthentic AI, right? So let's put it into our super scientific graph for a second. Why do I argue that this is a fundamental lack of imagination? Well, sort of for 2 reasons. First of all, it is applying not just the same the same approach that's happened before, but they're also failing to apply, I would argue, common sense to it and other lessons from the past. So let's put up a super scientific graph that I wrote out with a pen, because I think that makes it look more sciencey. On the horizontal axis, we've got efficiency. On the vertical axis, we've got work. Okay, so as our tools become more efficient, how much work goes on? Well, if we're talking just about the human, this argument says, well, as things become more efficient, the humans will do less. Now, this is the same promise we were given when we went to the paperless office. We were told that computers would now automate a lot of things you'd have to do before, and now you only have a 4-hour work week. And I know, of course, that's all of your experience, and this is one of your 4 hours, and I appreciate you spending it here. Okay. But what really happens? So we say, well, the system output stays the same. We're still doing the same stuff, but now the computer's going to do it instead of the person. Okay? This is a fundamental misunderstanding of what happens anytime new technology is developed. The Industrial Revolution did not allow us to produce exactly the same stuff as before. It allowed us to produce exponentially more stuff. So what always happens in truth? Like that. I was so proud of that PowerPoint animation. I'm not very good at animating stuff. All right. Okay, so if we apply this lesson, what does that mean for us? What it means is old medium, new medium, old content, 10 to 30 years later, what is the authentic content in this context? Well, for learning in particular, those of us who work in the field know about this. This is sort of the poppy version of it, what's called the learning pyramid. And this says, here's how much information you retain based on how it's given to you. So if someone just gives you a lecture, you retain something like 5% of it. How accurate are these percentages? Obviously incredibly contextual, but the point is the order, okay? If you read it yourself, you'll retain 10%. If you get an AV presentation, that's why PowerPoint can be a good thing, you retain more. A demo, you get more. Discussion group, you get more. And the absolute best that anyone's been able to scale is practice by doing. So anyone who's taken a math class or a computer class or something where you're learning a skill, you know this, right? Like you read the book, you hear it, but until you actually sit down to do it yourself, you don't really understand it. Those of us in learning theory know that there is another level here. But the people who are just copying what came before are copying what came before because this is the only thing that can scale. But there is another level to this, and it actually is the way we teach PhD students. And I think many, many, many of you who have kids have experienced this. The hidden level is teaching others. So who here has had the experience of your kiddo asking you to help with their math, and you think, oh, they're only in grade 3. This is going to be easy. And then you sit down to do it, and it turns out, oh, maybe I don't know how to do math. Or, that's not how my teacher does it. Like, well, I got a PhD, and tell your teacher this is the right way. Anyway, okay. So we teach others. But we can't do this at scale, right? I can't teach a lecture. Some of our first-year classes at U of T are 1,600 students. We can't have 1,600 students all teaching. But can AI do that? Absolutely. So this is what I said was the wrong thing, right? Here's the right thing. The right thing is you use the AI as a student that the kid teaches. And in fact, that's one of our first startup companies, and our chief scientist is here. It's building on his work. So by doing this, yes, there's still a human teacher there. Yes, the human teacher is still teaching all the kids. But now because the kids have that additional burden of teaching something else, their learning goes up, 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 up. Okay? And because of AI, we can do this at scale. So that is what I would argue is an authentic application of AI. Okay? Rule 2, tools enable people to accomplish more better. Last one. Last rule for authentic AI, and this is the one that is, to me, maybe the scariest. Conflating prediction and decision. If you need to make a decision, you apply a couple of things to it. You make a prediction of possible futures, and then you apply your judgment to choose one of those futures. Okay? What do I mean by that? People saw this? ChatGPT, US lawyer admits using AI for case research. This lawyer used ChatGPT, submitted the brief, and the brief included made-up references. Right? The reason that happens is AI is good at predicting a possible future that builds on the past. To it, a backwards reference in time is the future. Right? So it's perfectly normal from the AI's point of view to make things up. We call it hallucinating, but that is what they do. So what is it that we can actually use an AI to do? Well, a decision is a prediction plus judgment. AI is really, really good at prediction. We have made zero progress in judgment in the last 50 years in AI. But somehow people are using AIs to make decisions, which is the wrong use of AI. So quick framework, just a couple of examples to drive it home. Weather prediction versus weather judgment. There's a 70% chance of rain tomorrow. Judgment, it would be wise to bring an umbrella. That's a pretty low stakes decision, not a big deal to grab an umbrella. How about medical? This treatment has a 60% success rate in patients with similar conditions versus I recommend this treatment given your health and goals. Right? Hopefully none of you have had this experience. I've had the experience of my mom going through a situation. Oh, I mentioned my mom twice in one talk. Anyway, going through a situation where we were given these sorts of stats. And you have to make a decision, we're going to do this treatment or not? The AI can tell you what is the probability of success for its definition of success, but it can't take into account the factors like how invasive is this treatment? What are the long-term lifestyle implications? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay? What about hiring? This candidate has a high likelihood of being the one chosen for the role. AI can tell you that. Hiring this person is the right decision for the company. It can not tell you that. It can say, does it mimic the past? So people get confused when AI seems to be making decisions that are reflective of societal bias. Right? Why is it that my AI is making decisions based on race or gender or these sorts of things? It happens because it's being trained on data where that has happened. So it can give you a prediction like, this matches the pattern that we've got so far in the world, but we need to apply our judgment. Investing. The stock is projected to increase 10% over the next 4 years versus I'm going to invest in it because it aligns with the risk tolerance and goals. You know, I'll let you make that decision for yourself. All right, so what's the point of all this? This does apply here. Here's a great use of AI. There's a paper out of the UK where they fed in cases from the European Court of Human Rights and another one in the US where they fed in Supreme Court cases, and they could predict the outcomes with more than 70% accuracy. Okay? That's a decent use of AI. Are you going to make all of your decisions based on that coming out? I hope not. So authentic AI rule number 3, AI makes predictions, empowering the user to apply their judgment. So as you are being confronted with new technologies, I encourage you to apply this to these tests. Does it build on the best of what has come before? Does it enable people to accomplish more? And does it make predictions empowering the user to apply their judgments? 95% of the AI tools you see today get at least one of these things wrong, and you shouldn't buy them. All right. Last point. So if you believe me that those of us who've been doing this for a long time can show you the future, and I'll call it authentic AI, why is it that I would argue that, and forgive me, I know this is a North American summit, but I'm going to take a moment of Canadiana for a second. Why is it that Canada is in a unique position to lead this opportunity? Okay. Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, Canada is the epicenter for the invention of modern AI. Why did he say that? He said it because at the University of Toronto, for years, Jeff and other people in machine learning were using good old CPUs, and someone said to them, hey, did you know that these cards, these computer chips that people use to make computer games and do computer graphics can actually do the kind of computing you do really fast? And the first time a GPU was used to do AI was, up the street. The students who come from that program are now have all the following positions. Jeff was briefly running AI policy for Google. One of his students co-founded OpenAI. Another one of his students is the head of AI at XAI for Elon Musk. One of his students is the head of AI for Meta. His students co-founded Cohere. So this comes from here at the University of Toronto, and there's an equivalent excellent program at the University of Alberta where groundbreaking work has happened, and at the Université de Montréal in Quebec. Okay? So why does this happen? This happens because of what Vannevar Bush called the endless frontier. So at the end of World War II, they were sitting down to say, okay, we're going to reshape the global order. How should we build knowledge? And the social contract that Vannevar Bush and first Roosevelt and then Truman agreed on and set up in the US was government would give money to basic research, would give money to applied research, and all of that would flow into commerce, and then they would collect taxes to pay for it. And this is the engine that powers American innovation. So government, money out to basic, that spews out people and ideas, that gives us applied research, innovations that make their way to business and industry, and then it repays its debt through taxes while complaining taxes are too high. All right, what about in Canada? What's the opportunity? Well, we've got Jeff and his team who have been leading in basic research. And right here at the University of Toronto in applied computing, University of Toronto is #1 in the world. For those of you who are coming from other places, University of Washington, UCSD, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, all amazing places where this work goes on. Right? The union of these things together of basic research and applied research uniquely in Toronto. So what is the opportunity that all of you have as you're engaging with Canada now and trying to make up for the fact that we have not been very good at building this economy and these opportunities here in the country? And the reason we have not been very good at that is this last step, the wiggly line, getting our innovations into industry. So far, those innovations have not been crossing the bridge into Canadian industry and not doing it effectively. By and large, that happens for 2 reasons. One, Canadian universities are openly hostile towards the commercialization of their work. I say that as a university professor. The second is that historically, because the talent and the ideas come out, they're very often hired by firms south of the border. You'll notice that most of the firms that I listed a moment ago are American firms that are hiring up this incredible talent. So the opportunity that you have, the untapped resource that is available to everyone at this North American AI Summit is to reach into the Canadian system and help us to do better at making the transition of those innovations into industry. Okay? It's a great opportunity that we have. So that's why Canada. So summing up, AI has the same Charlie Chaplin problem as everything else. The technology you're seeing today that you call AI will have very little resemblance to the technology that comes 5, 10 years from now that is called AI. The authentic AI, apply those rules, and you'll be able to help to identify it, at least in the short term. And then finally, Canada is a great resource for all of you. So the future promise of AI is authentic AI. And I hope that you'll leave here today and go and find those opportunities. All right, thank you very much for your time.